Welcome to the Production Dojo, where today's dreams are tomorrow's laser sharks.
So, hi, and welcome to the Production Dojo. I'm Liam.
And I'm Ken.
And this is episode 2 of a podcast that is still defining itself. But one of the things we did want to take some time this episode to define was, what is the Production Dojo? In a nutshell, what we are trying to do is have a way to share some of the solutions that we come up with as we're working on client projects or some of our own investigations. Because some of the things that we are involved with are deeply rooted in NDAs, we can't necessarily share everything. But what we do like and what we do want to make sure that we're doing is sharing a complete problem and a solution, but there won't necessarily always be context. So we'll be happy to share some interesting technical solve or mechanical contraption that we've come up with, but it won't necessarily always be couched within a larger project. Where we can and where we find interesting projects that we can share in their entirety, you will see those, and we actually, if you stay tuned a little bit, we'll be announcing the first project that we'll be working on and how that's going to work itself out over the next few months.
Yeah, I think that's something good to really mention here is, there's going to be the projects that we can share some of that we're working on for ourselves or for clients, and sometimes that might seem a little artificial. We'll be like, hey, if you need to, run a motor off of, a 12-volt battery or whatever, it'll seem like, why would you ever need to do that? We can't always tell you why we need to do that thing. But we're also doing some projects specifically for Production Dojo. That way we can share, everything about it, soup to nuts. I think people will be happy to know that. So that's cool. And it's interesting to define what we're doing in episode 2, which I like. I think it's non-traditional, and I can go with that.
Yeah, well, we're non-traditional guys. My discipline and my interests go beyond just having one discipline and mastering that. It's sort of like that phrase, jack of all trades but master of none. I do have a few things that I've mastered, but I still like the idea of having competency across a wide number of disciplines.
Yeah, I agree. I find I get totally bored if I spend too much time on any one technology, at least without trying to branch out into other things. I think it's part of the nature of, I learn this stuff best if I'm building something with it, either software, hardware, or both. So anytime I'm, learning some new technology or playing with a new toy, I find myself wanting to build something, like complete with it, and that necessarily interfaces with other technologies. So I wind up, spending a couple of days diving into this or that, or, I can go rabbit hole for 3 or 4 days on ABS versus PLA.
Oh, please don't do that again.
Yeah, right. So I think that, it winds up being really easy to dive into areas and then bring that all back and go, now I know how to do a thing. Now I know how to go make something happen. So I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. One of the things that I do see as somewhat of a mainstay, at least for quite a while, 3D printing and the technology around that. I got really hooked on it even before we got our 3D printers, but, when we got our first one, I think it was 2013, was it? 2012, wow. The MakerBot Replicator 2, it was great the first couple of weeks, but unfortunately it just really was not something that was maintainable over time.
I was going to say, that's that thing about the deep dive, and then you kind of need to move on to other stuff. For a little while, I think getting a 3D printer working in and of itself was interesting enough that I know I didn't know how, wrong the experience was at the time. You know what I mean? It was new and interesting, exciting, and I'm upgrading the thing, and I'm buying a bunch of extra parts, and I'm replacing belts, and I'm, rewiring this, and I'm putting new connectors on that, and, I'm trying to find the perfect temperature to get everything to work. But, so it was a fair amount of time before I could turn out real parts on the Replicator 2 that I was completely happy with. But I was having fun learning something new. So it's only in retrospect that I look back on it and go, wow, that was not a great experience. That was kind of a rabbit hole in itself.
I think wasting an entire spool trying to print out one Yoshi was, for me, just incredibly frustrating. And I learned a lot in all those failures. The biggest thing that I learned was that I needed a new 3D printer because this just was not sustainable. Unfortunately, the Replicator 2, for all that it did do for us, and don't get me wrong, I got a little bit of work and a fair amount of popularity and understanding from this printer. It came really, really quickly, the time that I at least felt like I needed something else, because it didn't feel like what they were billing, that it was just plug it in and print and you're done. And a part of me would have been disappointed if it was, but for what I had to do to get it working, it really was a struggle.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. You know, there was a massive, look, there's a big gap between, you know, the dream that I know for a fact wasn't ever going to be true, which is, you know, you were going to take this thing home and it was like a dot matrix printer or an inkjet, you know, and I was just going to hit the button and everything was going to print. I knew that's not true. But there's a big gulf between there and almost uselessly unreliable. Like, I don't mind putting in the time as long as I'm deterministically getting closer and closer and closer to an answer. And one of the things with the PrinterBot, I mean, it was almost 2.5 years later that we're still, you know, not able to tackle some of the bigger projects that we had in mind, because I'm constantly chasing the idea that, you know, one more part or stiffening the arms with aluminum is going to make it work, or replacing, you know, I mean, by the time I sold that MakerBot 2, there wasn't very much left of it that MakerBot had shipped. And yours was much more stock than mine. You had better luck with it overall, probably, than I did.
I don't know if it's luck or stubbornness, really.
That's true. It could be.
I really did feel like I could get it working. And when I did dial it in, and when I did a mini enclosure so that no gentle breeze could touch it and cool the print head by half a degree, got the flexible build plate and those things, it got closer to reliable, but I just didn't have that idea in mind that I needed to change it and keep upgrading it and keep fiddling with it, other than just working with what I had as opposed to replacement parts.
Yeah, and some of that I think is, you know, we're printing different types of parts. You know, you're doing Yoshis and statues, and you're looking for kind of high quality, maybe smaller objects, and I'm, you know, it's in my nature to try and fill the build plate, you know, and so I'm looking, you know, I'm trying to get this thing to be reliable for, you know, 14, 16 hour prints, and it just wasn't, you know, I could get it to do it once, but it would never do it again, and then I would come back and it was looking better, and it just, I don't know, it was chaotic. So, I guess now that we're in episode 2 and we're talking about the 3D printers, we could, let's talk about sort of the demise of the MakerBot and sort of where we are now. So right around the time we're having our miserable sort of MakerBot experience coming towards the end of that, MakerBot is sort of going through its own rapid deterioration in the maker community. You know, they're coming out with their new models, and they've got these, you know, sort of much harder to service printheads coming in. So what naturally would have been a situation of us thinking about upgrading to new MakerBots to try and get the reliability we wanted, it turns out MakerBot wasn't the company that it had been. And then in the end, the Replicator 2, by many people's estimations, is probably the last of the great MakerBots.
It's a little sad that they peaked early. I mean, we're just guessing at this point. History will certainly tell if there's another one down the line that dwarfs how wonderful this printer could have been, or even brings out something that's a little bit better. But where we sit right now, there's nothing that the company has announced or that anyone has as a projection from them that puts us in any kind of position to have faith that we're going to get something that will be what we need.
Yeah, I agree. And so it was pretty clear about that. And we were, you know, chatting about this on Twitter, and I know I was talking about at this point I'm like tweeting almost daily about my frustrations with the MakerBot, and looking around at the other technologies. I'm on the Google, you know, 3D printer lists and groups, and people are throwing out different brand names, and I know we were looking at a couple of different brands. And then it was right around then we started talking about the Production Dojo as well. The Production Dojo Twitter account started to pick up a little bit of steam. Some people were looking at it, and right at that moment when we're sort of maximally frustrated, we've decided we have to move away from the MakerBot, and we've described in public for the first time sort of what we're hoping to do at the Production Dojo. It was at that moment that our white knight arrived.
I don't think anyone's ever referred to him as that publicly, but
it's, I don't know, maybe it might be the beard. The beard kind of might make that work for him. So yeah, I mean, I guess we'll tell the story real quick. So Brooke Dunn from PrinterBot sort of saw our frustration and that we were looking for something new, and that we were, one of the things we were going to be doing with the printers was hopefully producing this sort of how-to content and kicking off this project for the maker community. And you have to understand, audience, that this is February of 2015, so this is now almost a year ago, and we had these plans, and we were sort of working towards what we thought the Production Dojo was going to be. And Brooke got in touch with us and offered, made us an offer we could hardly refuse, which is he sent us a PrinterBot Simple Metal with a heated build plate, and he sent us a PrinterBot Plus Dual with heated build plate, the regular hot ends, and some very early experimental versions of their all-metal hot end way back. And the deal was he was going to send those to us, and all he asked from us was that we were completely honest about our experiences. So good or bad, whatever it was that came of it, that we were free to, and he encouraged us to talk about it. Does that sound about right to you? That seems the way it went?
That's absolutely true. That's how it went. And we are definitely grateful for the hardware and for having something that replaces and tries to alleviate the problems we were having with the MakerBots.
Yeah. And I think so. I know the day I unpacked the PrinterBot Dual here, I put my MakerBot on the, under the desk, and actually tweeted a photo of the MakerBot under the desk so that Brooke could see it. And I never turned it on again until I turned it on to update the firmware to sell it, and my PrinterBot has been just, in every way it was the experience that I wanted the MakerBot to have been. And that might be a little unfair to MakerBot because, now we're looking at early 2015, so, 3 years of development in the industry since we picked up our Replicator 2. So I guess it was October of 2012. So I'm willing to go, maybe in the 2 years that's part of it. But I don't know, I think maybe, the PrinterBot guys just really have it dialed in. And your Simple Metal has been kicking butt for you too, right?
Yes, it's just been a lot more reliable. I won't say that it's 100% foolproof and that every single print that comes out of it is magical spun gold dipped in unicorn tears. I did run into an issue when I was setting it up that it was a little bit of a miscalibration and the nozzle dug into the capstan. So it's wound up scratching that, and I had to replace it. But since I've got the PrinterBot, the only bit of it that I have had to change has been that capstan. Now, there are some things in here which I haven't even touched. The Simple Metal that I have actually has a Raspberry Pi in it, and that's one of the extra configurable items that allows for things like Octoprint and network printing to be installed. But I just haven't had the time to really dive into that, although I really would love to have this hooked up to the network and treat it like a regular printer. But because it's not, it's a few hundred degrees Celsius, I'm not just going to leave this thing on its own and just not wash it out the corner of my eye. So, I don't know, maybe one day I'll dive into that, but for now, I just do like the fact that when I hit print, if it makes it past the initial stage of putting down the skirts, 9 times out of 10, I'll have what I need.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't really get super comfortable leaving the room and like going to sleep while the, ridiculously hot metal bit just kind of runs its way around a bunch of plastic. It's sort of, call me paranoid, but I just prefer it run while I'm in the room. I don't feel compelled to watch it super closely, but I don't really go too far away from it. I did wind up pulling the Raspberry Pi that was in the base of the PrinterBot out when I had to open the bottom up to put the new, I ran the beta or the super prototype all metal hot ends for a while. They had their problems, but we knew that, when Brooks shipped them out to me, he's like, look, it's experimental, so, understand that it's experimental.
He did couch everything as being beta, so there's no surprises in any of that.
And that was fine. Yeah, the ceramic hot ends ran perfectly, and when I was feeling, experimental, I put the all metals on because I have a love of all metal print, and not for any particular reason. I like the idea of it. So, and there was a little bit of trouble with those, but while I was in there and I had to wire up some extra fans for them, I wound up transplanting that Raspberry Pi to the outside. So I do run Octoprint with mine. But are you still using a dedicated, like semi-dedicated Surface, right? Isn't it a Surface or a Windows tablet of some type?
Right, so I upgraded to the Surface Pro 3 last year as well. So what I did was, and this will wind up being a larger discussion of how I replaced my entire Windows home server with the Surface laptop. But my Surface Pro 1 is pretty much my dedicated print and networked storage station. So for me, that just works out rather well. I used to actually run C4D on it, but I transferred the license over to the Surface Pro 3. But I'm able to remote into that and run and monitor my printer as needed.
Yeah, that's pretty slick. I don't know if that's going to annoy people. You're doing what with a Surface? I'm just running a printer, dude. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, you are using it as a file server, I think, as well. So here we are almost a year, or we're getting on to 10.5 months after Brooke and the PrinterBot guys hooked us up with the printers, and we're finally getting around to being able to tell the story. But thanks again to you guys, if you're listening. We've been running these things ragged now for 10 months, and I think it's safe to say that, the experience of having these things be reliable is one of the reasons why we now feel, comfortable enough to kick into these longer projects and feel like we're not going to get a little ways into it and have to, go order a bunch of parts for the printers. You haven't sold your MakerBot yet, right? Are you?
No, it's actually under my desk. I was actually running the two of them together, but the MakerBot, I believe the Z switch on that is bad. So what winds up happening is when I turn it on, it'll run through some of the motions. When it actually raises the build plate, it doesn't know when to stop. So it just effectively tries to rip itself apart. So with that, I know that I need to replace that part in order to get it back up and functional. I just haven't been compelled to do it since the PrinterBot is filling my need for 3D printing.
Right.
So I still have to make a decision of whether or not I'm going to sell my MakerBot Replicator 2 or update it and see if I want to give it another go. Right now, I can tell you my feeling is that I don't necessarily want to fix this machine. I may wind up just selling it and buying another 3D printer or some other cool piece of hardware.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm eyeing the the desktop CAD machines.
That might have made up my mind.
I'm just saying, it'd be nice to be able to machine some stuff out of aluminum.
Yes, it would. I mean, we do have a couple people who have laser cutters that we can use, but unfortunately, no one who can mill us some parts if we need it.
Yeah, we need to make friends with somebody with a machine shop soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So that I guess that covers our PrinterBot Odyssey. So as we go forward, we will, when we're kicking off video, you guys will probably see the PrinterBots in there. and we will keep you apprised of, any problems we run into when we're moving into that. But so far, I don't think we have any problems to really talk about of note. The only time this thing's ever balked at anything I've really asked it to do outside of the normal, very sort of very day-to-day, kind of 3D printer, you got to make sure your filament's the right size, you got to make sure your temperature's in right. It's just when I'm using the hyper prototype hardware that I have a tendency to put on it, and but that's to be expected, and no problem.
Coming back to something that we touched on a little earlier, one of the things that interests both of us is combining technologies. So something that I did want to bring up as an interesting bit, but I can't really talk about everything around the entire project, is that for me, one of the things that has been a back burner interest for me is fashion, sewing, and how technology could work within wearables. That's something that's a misused and often abused term, but it is something that I feel a large part of the future. Every bit of sci-fi, every place that we can stick technology is moving toward this idea that I have more technology with me, and that technology is invisible. And I think that's where a lot of the future wearables winds up being. I had an opportunity to go to Google I/O last year in San Francisco, California, and I don't necessarily want to recap everything, but anyone who has seen or heard of Project Jacquard completely had their minds blown. And interestingly enough, the head designer of Levi's said that everyone there was now a fashion designer, so woohoo, I'm a fashion designer now.
Nice.
So something that I came up with that I'm actually in the process of creating is utilizing a little bit of wearable technology, but I found myself not liking how paper templates were used for creating fabric patterns. For me, worked out winding up being a little bit better was I took the 3D printer and printed out my own templates, and that also allowed me to do some things there that a normal paper template wouldn't do, which would, in this case, be having score lines and places where I knew I needed to make cuts but didn't necessarily want to put that in a paper template. So for me, I do like the fact that I can take my 3D printer and use it for almost anything, and even to augment ways in which I know problems have been solved and to solve them in different ways. I'm hoping that within the next few months before summer, I'll finish this project. I can talk a little bit more about it, but I just want to mention as a way to start to think a little bit differently about how we solve problems, both Ken and I, that sometimes it is okay to reinvent the wheel. And hopefully, when we talk about this a little bit more, this will be another one of those little inspirational bits that we can look back on and share with others to hopefully help them build things better and faster and in more intelligent ways. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So do you think that the 3D printed sewing templates, is that one of those things where you think you might be able to show the technique for creating a sewing template, or why there would be an advantage to a 3D printed sewing template, even though you wouldn't be able to show the specific templates you're using or what it is you're building? But do you think maybe our audience can look forward to a blog post or a demo of what that sort of thing looks like?
I think that I could certainly create something that would show, as a practical example, why it would be good to have a completely custom template and not to rely on paper.
Yeah, and that's that sort of thing we were talking about, where it's like, it doesn't matter that the template you're creating doesn't wind up getting sewn into anything special. It's not about what it is you're sewing, it's about creating the template. So, the pattern can be for something artificial or just a demo of some shapes, and that's one of those situations, like we talked about before, we can't always give all the context, but we can show you the technique.
So definitely look forward to a little bit more information and some techniques that will be shareable out of this experience. One thing that we can share and that we are actively working on right now is our first portion of a larger project that we're putting together specifically for Production Dojo. And we're expecting to have the first post for that with material lists and instructions around mid-February. The idea, well, let's not give away the idea entirely, but the
first part of the idea.
The first part of the thing is we would like to be able to electronically control a paintball gun. Now, the more modern paintball guns don't actually have a physical trigger, at least physical trigger mechanism as we would think with older model, or even, most of them are modeled after handguns, so we would think that, but a lot of them are electronic triggers. So what we'd like to do is work out a way to electronically control the firing of a paintball gun with an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah. And I think the astute among the audience can kind of get an idea that there's a lot of fun things that we can, a lot of things we can do after we have the ability to fire the paintball gun sort of electronically. If we've got it on a Raspberry Pi, if we've got it on an Arduino, we can make it sensitive to network events. We can put it on a timer. You can put a wireless trigger on it. You can do all sorts of stuff with it.
You can tie it to Git Blame.
That's right. Heck, we could put it on if this, then that, right? You get a bad tweet and it shoots you in the head. So the first part of what we want to do is going to be that. We're going to show the gun we got. We're going to show the teardown, and then we will show how we tie into the firing mechanism, and we will release at least example code or very bare bones code for the Arduino or the Raspberry Pi, depending on which one we wind up going with, that you could use to follow along in our footsteps and have your very own Arduino or Raspberry Pi electronically controlled Internet of Thing enabled paintball gun. And so just to reiterate, that project we are going to be able to talk to you guys about all the way through, because it's specifically for Production Dojo. So I think the next episode the next podcast episode will start having a little more technical information on this project. And like you said, I think people can really look for the real first info dump of the project sometime in mid-February. Sounds reasonable. And I think that about wraps it up. Do you have anything else you wanted to leave the audience with?
Well, I don't think I got to say it, but definitely a big, big thanks to all of the people at Printerbot for what they do. Even if we didn't have these particular printers, they were at or near the top of the list of replacements we had talked about for the MakerBot. But I definitely am appreciative that we have these machines and that they've enabled us to do some things which, quite frankly, I don't know if I would be as far along with my understanding of converting my 3D models into printable objects as I would be and am right now without this machine.
Yeah, it's very nice to spend more time working with what I'm printing than the printer,
Agreed.
It's nice to have messing with the printer be something I do for fun in a tinker way, as opposed to a necessary prereq to ever get a piece of plastic to come out. Okay, so this has been episode 2 of the Production Dojo, the introduction episode, number 2. And I guess we'll try and get another episode out to you guys fairly regularly, and keep checking back on the blog, and you'll start seeing more content.
All right. Catch you next time.